All right, so I'm the oddball. I don't own a company. I'm not a CEO. Ligo is an experiment, so we're kind of odd, but we do have a lot of innovation, and it's been important all along to do that. I will say that I sat for a long time trying to figure out how to start this talk because there's so many threads to pull when you talk about Ligo. The science, the people, our relationship to the environment around us, and all of those make it really hard to figure out where to start. So as a scientist, I thought, well, let me start at the beginning. About 13.7 billion years ago, our universe expanded, and then Aaron told me I had 20 minutes. So we'll skip forward just a little bit to 100 years ago. LIGO really gets its roots starting with Einstein. This is Einstein. I love young pictures of scientists versus old pictures of scientists because the origin stories of our scientists are as important as the origin stories of the science itself. Einstein grew up in Germany. He moved to Switzerland for quite a while of his childhood as well. In 1933, he was visiting the United States when Hitler came to power, and he came and stayed. He decided not to leave. That background has all kinds of parts to why he thought out of the box, why he did things differently, and why he was able to come up with what they called his miracle year. And in 1916, he published a general theory of relativity, completely different way of looking at gravity than anybody had ever thought of before. Most of us have been lied to for all of our education, being told that gravity is absolutely a force that pulls you down to the ground. And if you jump off the stage, you're going to get pulled down because of a force, right? Does this sound like a familiar story you may have heard somewhere? Einstein says that's a complete lie. It's not true. Scientists today can't tell you whether it's true or not because we don't know what gravity is. But Einstein's model is a really good model, and it's the underpinning of what LIGO is. Einstein's model is that space and time, the space we move in, forwards, backwards, side to side, up, down, is connected to the time we live in. And that space and time, that if you stick a mass inside of space-time, it warps it. So the Earth sitting in space-time warps space-time. And that ultimately is the gravity you feel. So if I were to jump off the stage, it's not that a force pulls me down to the ground, but rather there's this warp in space-time, and I just fall along that warp. You can think of like a big trampoline and somebody sitting in the middle, and you drop a marble, it's just gonna roll in, right? Because it's following the curve of the trampoline. This is what Einstein says gravity is. But things get weirder from there, because if space and time are connected and space warps, what must happen to time? It's got to warp too, right? So time here on Earth is actually slower than time for an astronaut in the International Space Station. Your second is different than their second. Now, when Einstein thought of this in 1916, he didn't know why that's relevant or useful. But engineers in the 1980s, when they stuck up GPS satellites, and they thought that this was a load of hoo-ha and didn't pay attention, GPS didn't work. The GPS you use to get so many places only works if we take into account this time difference, an idea that started 100 years ago. So why am I talking about all this? Where's LIGO come into this? Do we sit still in the middle of space-time? No, our Earth is going around something, right? As we go around through space-time, it changes where that warp is. You can see it shift this warp as it goes. And that produces waves. That produces ripples in space-time itself. They're called gravitational waves. And Einstein originally thought they were an algebraic mistake. He didn't think they were real. He didn't think they were anything. Checked his math and said, okay, they're real, but they're useless. You're never going to find them. They're too small. And they'll have no impact on us. So he just kind of forgot about it. In the 1950s, somebody named Joseph Weber decided to try to look for these, encouraged by somebody named John Wheeler. Have we heard that name before, maybe? Anybody from the Tri-Cities enough to know who John Wheeler is? The B reactor, he was one of the lead scientists on the B reactor. He encouraged somebody to look for these gravitational waves. Weber found nothing. He thought he did. He didn't. But he encouraged other people to look, and that's where we come into the story. So now LIGO comes in. One of our founders, one of the people that people really look at as the beginning of LIGO itself, is Rainier Weiss. Rainier Weiss was also born in Germany. He was born in Berlin in 1932 to a Jewish father and a Christian mother. In 1933, they fled, again, because of Hitler. Same year that Einstein came to the United States, his family left Germany to go to Prague. By 1938, they realized they had to flee farther. And with the sponsorship of a family in the United States, they were able to leave Prague and come here. He grew up in New York. He went to MIT. He developed hi-fi systems and sold them as a kid. He was really interested in electronics, which is how he ended up at MIT. And then he flunked out because he fell in love and he ran off with a woman somewhere. And then they fell out of love and he didn't know what to do. Failure is a common thread in LIGO in lots of ways. So Ray failed. He came back. He got a job as a technician at MIT. Ultimately, his advisor, Gerald Zacharias, got him into a PhD program. After his PhD, he worked in a lot of different places, went back to MIT as a teacher, and in 1972, 10 years after his PhD, he had the first thought of how could you measure gravitational waves in a different manner. And his thought was something called an interferometer. You have a laser light that impedes on a beam splitter and spits light that goes down 2 different arms. And as that light comes back, it merges again. And light's really great because it interferes with itself, just like water waves does or sound waves do. And you can see that you get nothing. You get no light because of the way they interfere, except for when something really random happens. When a gravitational wave passes, it changes the lengths of the arms. It stretches and squashes space itself. It stretches and squashes us, the Earth, and everything around it as they pass. And as that happens, the light changes how it lines up. And you start getting bright spots, dark spots, bright spots, dark spots. Ray realized you could use light as a ruler to look for gravitational waves, okay? That was huge. In 1972, he started talking to a few people. Lots of people thought he was crazy, clear up until about 5 years ago. And finally, he convinced a few people to come along for the ride. So him, Robbie Vogt, Kip Thorne, there's Ray, Fred Robb, which some of you may know from the area, and Ron Drever wrote a proposal to the National Science Foundation. And they said, I'm just amazed that they actually got anybody convinced. They said, there's this thing. It's insanely small. Most people don't think we can find it. Technology does not exist to find it right now. But if you give us money, we're going to build a detector that won't find it. But in the meantime, we'll do research to make a better detector that will hopefully find it in like 30 years. And somehow they convinced Congress people to sign a check. And this amazes me. Fred says this is the money plot, that this is how they convince people. And that's a beautiful graph, right? It makes perfect sense. It's clear as mud. It took me like 3 years to have any idea what that was saying. But it says something very clear, which is they told Congress, we need to make an early detector. It won't detect. We will make a second detector, and it will detect. The reason Fred says people funded them for 30 years through failure, is they never lied to them about what they were going to do. We're going to build this thing. It won't detect, but it will get us through these steps, and then we will get to a detection. The National Science Foundation bought this. Caltech and MIT are the 2 folks who run this, and they've been funding it since the 1980s. We broke ground in the Tri-Cities in 1996. There are 2 locations. We are 1 observatory, 2 locations. One might look familiar because it's a pretty stark landscape. That's us. The one down in the right corner, that's Ligo Livingston, which is in Louisiana. These 2 detectors started running in 2000. In 2015, they were able to make an immense discovery. But I want to go back to a point I heard a speaker say earlier about how we had all this intelligence in this area and all these PhDs. That was a little bit of why LIGO was here, but to be honest, they imported most of their PhDs. It wasn't the PhDs of why LIGO came here. It was the people who knew how to build LIGO, the skilled workforce that could weld the tubes for us, who could mill the things we need milled. That skilled workforce, that's what brought LIGO here, because that's expensive and it's important. And if you're going to have a vacuum system that's 1/1,000,000th of the atmospheric pressure around you, you better have the best welders and the best people to do that. This is actually a beautiful picture because it's Ray Weiss right over here. It's hard to see. Talking to all of these folks, telling them why we had to have such precision, why this stuff was also important, okay? And it all worked. It got us to this sensitivity. This is a crazy number. I didn't say it earlier. Let's go back to this picture for a second. These arms are 2.5 miles long, okay? That's an important number to have because those 2.5 mile long arms are changing by this much when a gravitational wave passes. There's a human hair if that helps for scale. 2.5 mile long arms are changing by less than a single proton to find these waves. The skilled tradespeople who built the detector, the scientists who made it run and thought through the things, all of that together allowed us to make a an instrumental discovery. Technology was a big part of this, both what we created, new lasers that had never been done before, the purest, the most frequency-dependent lasers in the world, purest mirrors in the world, that still, as they develop them, fail 50% of the time, because that's how pure we need them. We also needed technology. Technology was a huge, huge part. We take 300,000 channels worth of data all the time. 30,000 channels of that is just environment, temperature, pressure, whatever's around us. We have thousands of feedback loops. If you don't have really good collaboration between your computers and your electronics, analog and digital, if you don't have that, this doesn't work. Also, collaboration was a big thing, which we'll talk about in a second. I said we made a discovery, 2015, just 4 years ago, for the first time ever. Actually, 2 days from today is the anniversary. It's the 4-year anniversary of us finding this. We got these pretty squiggly lines. And I like to call them pretty squiggly lines because otherwise they make no sense to anybody. They're pretty squiggly lines. But those pretty squiggly lines came from 2 black holes. Both were about 30 times the mass of our sun. They were orbiting each other. They got faster and faster and faster and faster. They're warping space and time around them as they're orbiting and putting off these gravitational waves. They finally merge into a black hole that's 60 times the mass of our sun, and they lose 3 times the mass of our sun in energy during that process. That energy is all gravitational waves. That energy went through the universe for 1.3 billion years before it hit our detector in Livingston, Louisiana, and 7 milliseconds later hit our detector in Hanford, Washington. This was the start of a revolution in astronomy. It's a whole new way to look at the universe. If you think about it this way, it's the same thing as if you've watched a silent movie for all of human existence. For all of human existence, we've done astronomy. We've looked up and tried to understand what was up there. But we've only had a silent movie. We've only been able to use light. This is akin to adding a soundtrack to a movie. We now have 2 senses to understand the universe around us. Fred likes to say that the secret to the success of LIGO is one team, many mail codes. Every single marker on this map is part of the LIGO scientific collaboration. 1,300 members, 101 institutions in 20 different countries. LIGO succeeds because of that. Having the World Wide Web allowed us to have that collaboration, allowed us to have that success. Having commonalities in software that didn't used to exist, that allowed us to destroy the technical barriers to collaboration and bring this collaboration into the forefront. I do want to mention Fred for a moment. Fred was the observatory head here for 25 years. He has moved up to an associate director inside of our lab, but this is my favorite picture of Fred. It hangs in his office. Fred also was the son of German immigrants. He grew up in New York. They grew up poor. He grew up working in leather factories and he was a taxi driver for a time. None of the stories of LIGO or the people were straight paths to where they got to. Fred went to college. He asked somebody one time, he sent a bunch of mail out to people saying, hey, I would like to go to this conference in Europe. Would you fund me? And his friends all laughed at him because nobody's going to fund you to do that. And he said, well, cost me a stamp, whatever. And they sent him. Somebody emailed him, or not emailed him, jeez. Is it Friday yet, folks? Somebody mailed him back and said, I'll send you. And that helped his career get going. So all these little things bring LIGO to where it is, and all those experiences help LIGO be who we are. We have more detectors all over the world. Well, we collaborate with them, lots of collaboration members. I think the origin story of the science is interesting, but the origin story of our collaboration of our people is way more interesting, because why you have innovation comes from all the different ways these people think. Their life experiences is why they think the way they do, and it's why that we coming together as a group allows us to make this groundbreaking science. So I'm gonna tell you one last story of an origin. This is me. I didn't grow up in Nebraska, but I grew up in Kansas. It's Nebraska with wheat instead of corn, otherwise it's the same state. I grew up on a farm, I grew up poor, and I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I wanted to leave the state, so I went to the University of Wyoming. I was excited to leave, but I was gonna come back and I was going to work on the farm with my family, because that's all I knew. And then life likes to throw you curveballs. A year into college, I had a boyfriend who didn't like the idea of me breaking up with him, so he decided to try to kill me. It's a small thing, but I had to leave town because of that. And I thought I had left my dreams behind because I couldn't even leave Kansas for more than a year because of something. I went back to Fort Hays State University in Kansas. started a new school. And this gentleman is Kayvon Aflatooni. He's from Iran. Kayvon taught me electricity and magnetism, and I fell in love with physics, and I changed my major. But then I got tired of physics, so I thought, let's go to Phoenix and be a motorcycle mechanic. I did that for a little bit. And then I decided, well, I really like physics and miss it, so I went to ASU and decided to teach. So I taught for a while. And somewhere in that, I ended up wanting to do more, to be back with physics. And I found a job at Ligo, and I came here. And I'm amazed at what I do now. Last week, I was sitting in Warsaw, Poland. Earlier this year, I was sitting with Ray Weiss, a previous legislator from the area, Larry Haler, talking to legislators, convincing them that our community deserves $7 million to build an outreach center so we can inspire our kids here. I had no idea, as that little girl on a farm, that I would have the opportunity to do those kind of things. But every experience, from moving to Wyoming, to the domestic violence, to working as a waitress or on a farm, all of them led me to here and allow me to innovate in a way other people don't. Your whole story, every bit of who you are and how you got to where you are, is what allows you to be an innovator. Using all of that, the baggage, the bad, the good, whatever, that allows us to push these things forward. It's true of everybody in Ligo. All right, I know I need to finish, so my last comment is we're also all connected in our origins. You may have heard you're stardust, and you are, and it seems trite, but it's beautiful. Every bit of what was created, every bit of atoms in your body was created in a star. Iron and things like that were created in supernovae. And LIGO, as of 2 years ago, can tell you that the gold in your wedding band, the silver in your necklace, was created in the merger of neutron stars, something we didn't know until 2 years ago. Every bit of what's on us or in us came from the stars. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. Questions? Yes. Sure. Yeah, the speed of gravitational waves is the speed of light. They're 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. I always say the speed of light is a horrible name. It really is the speed of anything without mass. And gravitational waves do not have mass. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.